So the next thing I want to talk about is the men's doubles final. And the reason for that is the title that I've given this section in my notes is top two men's pairs face in the final. Now I know that Kim Won-ho and Seo Sun-jae are the world number ones. They're the world champions, and they've won God knows how many tournaments now this year. So obviously they are the top pair, of course. But obviously Fikri and Alfian aren't the world number twos. But that's mainly because I think they've only played 6 or 7 tournaments together. So they haven't got enough ranking points. But I think the way they've been playing, that I think if they continue that way, which I can foresee happening, then I think they're going to, not before too long, become the second best pair in the world. If they can maintain the level of consistency. In terms of the last, since they've become a pair, the two pairs that are the most consistent are Kim Won-ho and Seo Sun-jae, and Fajr Alfian and Mohamed Fikri. In fact, if you want any indication of their consistency, over the last 2 weeks, the Indonesians have reached the final both times. I want to talk about this final because I thought it was quite interesting. But before I kind of get to the final itself in France, I think from their last 2 meetings, the first time they faced, I think it was in the China Open, in like the quarterfinals. The deciding factor, the Indonesians won that time. They came out incredibly fast and quick, rotating quickly, and caught the Koreans slightly off guard. They were a little bit too defensive and weren't quite prepared. When they played the next time, I felt that the Koreans were far more prepared for it. They were much more ready in certain situations, in transitional phases, in defense, in attack. And the Indonesians got caught off guard. And so what it set up quite nicely was how were the pairs going to approach this final. And it seemed in the first game that it was the Indonesians who once again were like, right, okay, so last time we were a little bit off pace. We weren't as prepared as they were, so we need to come out extra fast like we did in China, and they kind of blasted the Koreans. The Koreans looked completely static in the first game. I was a bit like, wow, what's happening? It wasn't like the Indonesians were playing absolutely mind-blown. They were playing really good badminton, but they were helped by the fact the Koreans were static. When Seo Sun-jae was at the net, there was a few times where Kim Won-ho would smash, and usually Seo Sun-jae is looking to say, especially if it's his forehand, because they're a right-left combination, looking to come out and help his partner. But he was stuck at the net, and then Kim Won-ho got caught in a late corner, and they were able to get countered. Or there was a few times where Kim Won-ho's usually so good that once he gets on top of the net, he can finish it. And there's a few where he missed it from there because again, he wasn't really moving his feet or getting into the right position. He was just a little bit. They were caught kind of shuttle watching, and they were just completely off pace. And I was thinking, okay, this looks like it's gonna. If it continues like this, if they don't do something, it's going to be a rather one-sided final. Second game, if you're a Korean fan, fortunately they were able to come out a little bit better, but I think they were helped. But I think the Indonesians did go off the boil a bit. I think end-wise, there was a little bit of drift here in France, but it wasn't too noticeable, so it wasn't like one end was much, much better for pairs. I just think that the Indonesians kind of switched off slightly. And the Koreans, add to that, the Koreans just were a little bit more prepared. I think they gave themselves a bit of a talking to. Now, I think one factor in the first game, and I'm not 100% sure, this is a bit of a guess based on what I saw in the semi-finals, but I wasn't sure if Kim Won-ho is actually 100% fit. I think he could be suffering from an illness. Now, the reason I say that is in the semi-final, he looked very flushed in his face and actually was putting the ice pack that usually players have on their neck. He was dabbing it on his face, so I'm not sure whether he was quite warm, had fluish symptoms or whatever. After seeing that in the semi-finals, and then the way they played in the first game in the final, I thought, oh, okay, so maybe Kim Won-ho isn't feeling too good. And even in the second, that's why he was probably a little bit static, a bit off, and maybe why Seo Sun-jae wasn't quite sure how to approach it. I wasn't quite sure. That was my thinking. And on top of that, obviously the Indonesians were exposing it. And then in the second, it looked like there was a few times where at the start, the score was a bit closer, but I still got this feeling that the Koreans were a bit static. But then there was a few times where I think Kim Won-ho really was like, no, I'm going to give it everything now. And he did slowly. They slowly started to get themselves into it. And I think, that, like I said, they were helped a bit by the fact the Indonesians just ever so slightly shut off. And then by the time you got into the third game, I think the Koreans were into it. And in all honesty, their defense was absolutely unreal. The Indonesians couldn't break through their defense at all. But what also added to that, which they weren't doing in the first I'd probably say 2 games for the Koreans was that not only were they very hard to get through, but then they were also blocking into the space, and then they were moving into the space. They stopped being as static. You started to see both players kind of defend and move forward. They were rotating around each other a lot better, and they were just kind of playing like the normal Kim Won-ho and Seo Seung-jae that we're used to. And I would also add that whilst the Koreans' defense was really good, the Indonesians' defense was also pretty solid, but the difference was the Indonesians weren't stepping into their defense or trying to use the space. They were literally just kind of like lifting it up, whereas the Koreans were far more alert, and their defense they were starting to use it to do something. They could survive the attacking situations from the Indonesians, but then when they had the chance, they could block it into the space and get themselves onto the attack. Now, I think the last thing I'll say about this final, I do think the Indonesians did play pretty well. It wasn't a poor performance from them, although the scoreline in the second and third was relatively one-sided. And I think a lot of people will talk once again about the firepower, because obviously they couldn't get through the Korean defense. But I think, for me personally, the Indonesians lost because in the second they shut off ever so slightly. They kind of allowed the Koreans to find their game, and I think they could have just been a little bit more switched on in certain situations, a little bit longer in that second. They could have, I think, then the Koreans might have lost that kind of belief a little bit. But it was also the defense. Like I said, the Koreans were utilizing space, whereas the Indonesians were just defending. Yeah, those are my thoughts on the final. I think, again, another thing I'll add just quickly at the end for the Indonesians is I still think it's been an incredibly positive start. They've obviously been very consistent, and I think although they weren't able to win this week or last week, I think the fact that they were able to do so well in slower conditions, when they are a pair that's known for not having the most firepower on court, I think is a testament to how good they are as a pair and the other kind of attributes they got. Excited to see more of this Indonesian pair moving forward. And I still think potentially they've still got a chance of the World Tour finals, but they'd have to pretty much win their remaining tournaments. But again, that's obviously not the end goal. They're obviously going to be looking towards the big tournaments next year and getting themselves even higher in the rankings. And like I said, I do think if they continue this way, they will be right up beneath Kim Won-ho and Seo Seung-jae as world number 2s. Because, these two pairs, I think at the moment, based on recent form, they are the top 2 pairs in the world.